So I'm Cath and I'm a consultant with SILT, and today we are going to be looking at managing assessment in terms of the quick eval, grades, and the rubrics tool. And I do have my colleague here with me as well, Cheng-Wen. So I'm going to hand over to Cheng-Wen to introduce herself.
Oops. There you go. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to see you here and hope you find it a useful session. Thanks. Back to you, Cath.
Thanks, Cheng-Wen. Right, so as I said, these are three tools that can be used for managing assessment, and they're quite comprehensive tools. So you might find that the pace today is fairly fast, but we are recording and we will give you the link to these slides afterwards, so you can always revert back to the slides or the recording to just recap over something that might have gone quite quickly today. But just to let you know, on the next slide, you'll see a disclaimer. And if you've been to any of these other webinars that we presented over these past few weeks, you'll know that a lot of the content within Brightspace is within flux. And as things change, we will update these slides accordingly. So don't get alarmed if you come back and you see something slightly changed on the slides. We're just making sure that we keep this in sync with the functionality that is available within the Brightspace environment. So today's webinar, we're going to be touching on three tools, as we mentioned, the quick eval tool, the rubrics tool, and we're going to take a look at creating a new rubric, attaching a rubric to an item, and then using the rubric to mark, and then looking at the grades tool as well. So the grades is essentially equivalent to the grade book within the Vuller environment. And in that regard, we're going to be looking at the grade setup wizard, grade schemes, managing grades, and entering grades. So I'm just going to check with everybody that's here, because I'm seeing some people that have joined us today that may not have been in our previous webinars. Is there anybody here that can just, you can just use the raised hand icon or the one of the reaction icons. Is there anybody in the webinar today that has not yet been able to access their sandbox environment within Brightspace? Anybody that has not yet been able to do that? I just want to check that everybody has visited the Brightspace environment and been able to log in and actually get access to their sandbox. Right, so it looks like everybody here has been able to do that. So that's great news. So you would be very familiar with this landing page where you would just use the blue UCT login button to actually enter your network credentials, and that will drop you straight through into the Brightspace environment. And then this would also look very familiar to you. This will be the landing page as it looks at the moment, because remember, things are in flux, and also your courses that you align to, you will have a different set of courses to somebody else. So the little cards that you have on the front page may look slightly different, but this is essentially the UCT home page. And the first tool that we're going to have a look at is going to be the quick eval tool. So what does the quick eval tool do? It essentially offers you a single location to be able to view all the learner submissions that are awaiting evaluation. So you might think the word learner is slightly strange, but in the Brightspace environment, you will see that they sometimes use the word learner and sometimes use the word student interchangeably. The quick eval also gives you a place where submissions that are made to assignments, quizzes, and discussions are displayed in a sortable list and can be selected to take you directly to the relevant assessment page of that item. And lecturers can sort, filter, and search the submissions to prioritize their evaluation work. So essentially, think of it like a hub where any outstanding items that require your manual intervention to do some manual evaluation or grading would be listed. And the items which you could potentially find within this quick eval hub, if you want to think of it as a hub, would be either assignments, quizzes, or discussions. All right, so where do you find this quick eval tool? Well, right on the landing page, when you first log in, you will find it on the nav bar right there. You will see quick eval, and this quick eval link is one which takes you to actually a special area within Quick Eval, which is called the multi-course Quick Eval. So what that means is this is a Quick Eval tool which actually looks at all of your courses. So if there's been any submissions to any of the courses that you are running or aligned to, they would all be located in this multi-course Quick Eval, which is accessible from the nav bar right on the initial page when you first enter Brightspace. And as with everything within Brightspace, there's often more than one way to access the same space. So on the same page, once you scroll a little bit lower on this page, you'll be able to see that you can also access this multi-course Quick Eval tool from the card, which is on this same page. So either from the navbar link or from the card, it will both take you to the multi-course Quick Eval. And the next place you can also find a link to Quick Eval is actually within a course. So obviously, if you have gone into an actual individual course, the Quick Eval link within a course will only show you the submissions within that particular course. So while the functionality is the same within a course and on the UCT homepage, the area that the Quick Eval is kind of scanning and the results that it's showing you is slightly different. So in a course, it is only showing you submissions that have been made to that particular course. And you'll be able to access the Quick Eval within a course from the drop-down where it says Manage Course, and then go to Quick Eval on the drop-down list, or you can use the card, which is also located here. There's a Quick Eval card. Remember also that every tool that you use within your course, you can also access it from the course admin link, which is under Manage Course. So Course Admin, remember, gives you the comprehensive view of all the tools that are aligned to your particular course. On the next slide, you'll see a quick snapshot of what that actually looks like. So this is what course administration or course admin actually looks like. And you can see there that the Quick Eval tool is listed there in the assessment category. So that's another way to get to it, because you might want to get to the Quick Eval when you are in a different space within your course. So remember, you can always go to Manage Course, Course Admin, and find links to all of your tools here. So as we mentioned, the Quick Eval tool can be used for various different things. It can be used for quizzes, it can be used for assignments, and it can be used for discussions. So on the next page, you'll see what it looks like to see results in the Quick Eval. So you'll see that it is presented in a table format. You'll have your users listed there with their profile pictures if they've uploaded profile pictures. You'll see little icons which actually indicate what these submissions are. So you can see there's an icon for a discussion there and the other icon for the assignment. And at the top there, you'll see that the column headers, first name, last name, and activity name, and course and submission date, those are all sortable lists. So if you click on any of those items, you'll be able to sort the layout and the list in this table using those clickable headers. And the view that you're looking at the moment, you can see you can view it by submissions or you can view it by activities. So at the moment, we're viewing it by submissions. And essentially, all you would do to actually access an item to be graded or evaluated would be to click on the user's name, and that would take you straight through to the relevant space where you could evaluate that particular submission. So remember that these are submissions that require your manual intervention to actually evaluate or grade them. So you will not see items here. For example, if you'd created a quiz that was a multiple choice quiz and everything was being marked automatically and the mark was being displayed to the student at the end as soon as they'd completed the quiz, you would not see them listed here. This only lists those elements that are awaiting your evaluation. So on the next slide, you'll see that there's a few more options I just wanted to draw your attention to. And that is on this sortable list. You can also filter. So you can filter by activity name if you're looking for all the submissions by a particular activity name. And you can also filter by date. So if you know that you've had some recent submissions and you want to see everything that was submitted in the last 24 hours, you could use the filter by date option and sort and filter your list accordingly. Just picking up on a question that we have in the chat here. Right, Kirsten's asking, is there some way to put students within a course into smaller groups? Okay, Kirsten, there is definitely a grouping option. So if you were familiar with the way of creating groups within Vula, that same functionality does still exist within Brightspace. And were you asking that in relation to how the results would be displayed within this quick eval tool? Were you meaning, could you just see a particular group? Right, okay. So you would be able to do that here by using the filtering and sorting options here. So you should be able to actually filter by and be able to pick up particular groups and use the filtering options at the top there. But the facility to create groups, you would obviously have to have created them first, does exist. We're not going to touch on that today, but it's very similar to the way that you created groups within Vula. Great, thanks, Kirsten. Right, so that is a quick kind of snapshot. I know I am going really fast of the quick eval tool. And once all your evaluations had been completed and there were no more outstanding evaluations, you would get this little message to say you're all caught up. There's no submissions that need your attention, but a reminder to check back often for new submissions. So that's essentially the quick eval tool. It's a quick view into any submissions within quizzes, discussions that actually require your manual intervention for evaluation. Right, we're going to take a look at rubrics now. If you've been to some of the earlier webinars, you might have seen that we've touched on rubrics for different tools, but today we're going to delve into it a little bit more in depth to actually find out what the rubric does and how we actually work with it. So a rubric tool allows you to evaluate an activity or item based on a set of predefined criteria. Instructors can create rubrics at the course level, and you can actually reuse them at other course offerings, because that's something that is quite often asked, is if I create a rubric for this course, can I also use that rubric in another course? And yes, you can, by using the import, export, copy course options within Brightspace. And rubrics can be added to assessed course activities. So this would mean you could add a rubric to an assignment, a discussion, or a grade item. And just for the purposes of seeing how this works, we are going to be looking at it in the context of an assignment. Right, so on the next slide, you'll be able to see where you actually find access to this rubric tool. So as you might expect, you'll find it again under Manage Course, and on the drop-down list, you'll be able to see rubrics. And as with everything else, you can also find it on the course admin page. So just another snapshot of the course admin page. And as you might expect to find it in the assessment category, there's a link to rubrics over there. And that is how you access the rubric tool. So right at the start, it's good to note that there are actually two different types of rubrics available. So the first one we're going to take a look at is one which is called a holistic rubric. So a holistic rubric is essentially what they call a one-dimensional rubric. So you can have multiple achievement levels. So the levels are the columns. They're called levels within Brightspace, but it has one single assessment criteria. So the assessment criteria is represented by the row going across from left to right, and the achievement levels are the columns which are running vertically. So you can see in this particular example here, there's the columns are inadequate, average, very good, excellent, and there's percentages aligned to these. and you can see the description below each of those levels. So this holistic rubric has one criteria and it's scored using percentages, or you can elect to not represent numbers. You don't want percentages or numbers at all, and you can just have the description. So this is an example of a holistic rubric. And just to note that, and a really nice feature within Brightspace is you can actually print the rubrics out, which is something that was often requested within Vula, but it didn't exist within Vula, but it does exist within Brightspace. So that is a holistic rubric. And the other type of rubric that you get is called the analytical rubric. So this one is slightly more complex. So you also have various achievement levels that you decide to put into the rubric, but this one has multiple criteria. So in other words, multiple rows going across. So it's more of a two-dimensional rubric. It has the multiple achievement levels, as you can see, the columns, but it also has multiple assessment criteria, the rows going across from left to right. And this basically allows you to assess students' achievements based on multiple criteria, but using a single rubric. And on these kinds of rubrics, analytical rubrics, you can use scoring methods of points, custom points, or you can have text only if you didn't want to represent any numbers. So those are the two different types of rubrics that you get within Brightspace. Now let's take a look at how you actually create a new rubric. So we are going to pretend that we're actually starting one from scratch. So we haven't been given one from our colleague and we haven't imported it from somewhere else. We're going to start from scratch. So when you arrive on the rubrics page, you will see that there is a big blue button that says new rubric. So quite intuitively, that is where you're going to start by clicking on new rubric. So this page might look pretty busy, but there's some important areas that I'd like to draw your attention to on this page. So this is the new rubric that actually loads. And from here, you're going to work with this basic kind of template or skeleton and actually customize it to your requirements. So the first thing that's absolutely mandatory is you do need to give your rubric a name, okay? So that will be its unique identifier. So the naming field is absolutely mandatory. Underneath that, you will see there is a drop-down list next to type, and this is where you would select the two different types of rubrics that we just mentioned, if you would like to create a holistic one or an analytic one. So in our example, because the analytic one is slightly more complex, we're going to work with an analytic rubric for this particular example. And then you will see the scoring options that are available to you. So you can decide to have no score represented, you can decide to have points, or you can decide to have custom points. And then a nice tool there is the reverse level order. So you can decide if you would like to have your rubric going from highest to lowest, or from lowest to highest. So you would just have to click the reverse level order, and the levels, which are the columns, would swap from left to right. Another nice feature at the top right-hand corner you'll be able to see is that all the edits that you make on the rubric while you're creating this new rubric actually save automatically all the time. So you will see that it says saving, and it will save all of your changes. So don't look for the save button. It's actually doing it for you all the time. And you will see there's a status drop down there. So the three different status items are published, archived, or draft. So published just means it is available. It may not be visible to the students. Visibility is something else. It's a different event. But published just means you've created your rubric and it is available to actually attach to an item as a marking schema. Archived means that it's a rubric that you might have used in the past. You don't want to get rid of it. You would like to keep it around because you might either reuse it or rework it sometime later, but archived is when it's kind of put away for later use. And draft, this is very similar to the way it was within Vula. Draft means you working on something currently and it's still a work in progress and you don't want it to be available to actually attach to an item. It's still being created. So by default, when you first start a rubric, it will automatically go to this published status. But remember, published doesn't mean that students can see it. That's related to visibility. So published just means it's available to attach to an item. Right, I'm just going to check if there's any questions up until this point. You may either type in the text chat or even raise your hand and speak if you have any questions. Right, not seeing any questions at this stage, so I think we're going to press on fairly quickly. So here you can see this is just animation to actually show you the items. So there's the reverse level option that will actually move the items, and you can use the plus sign at the beginning or the end to actually add extra levels. You can also use the 3 dots, will give you extra options, and you can use the drag handles to actually move the criteria around. So if you decide you'd like the criteria in a different order, you can use the drag handles to just drag the rows around. So it's just showing you the different drop downs and the reverse level options, how that gets implemented. And you'll notice that the points and the level names, you can actually adapt those yourself as well. You can also add in initial feedback if you want to. It's completely optional, it's not mandatory. And you can also add in descriptions as well for each of the levels. Right, on the next slide, we're going to take a look at what are called criteria groups and criterion. So a criterion would be a single row represented in your rubric, and a criteria group is when you add a whole new group. So a criteria, as we said, is a row which can contain multiple different levels. If you want to have another criterion with the same amount of levels, so you can see in this particular example, the first criterion is the first row, and there's 2 levels represented there. If you wanted to add another criterion that also had 2 levels, you would click the option there that says add criteria. But if you wanted to add another criteria that had a different amount of levels, you can see the second row here has many, many different levels, then you would have to add a criteria group. It becomes a distinct group, so it's separate from the top row, and it gives you the option to add multiple different levels. So just to note that you get criteria and criteria groups. Right, on the next slide, you'll be able to see adding and deleting a criterion. So here, if you want to add a new criteria, as we said, with the same amount of levels, you would just click the add criterion button, the little plus and the blue add criterion, and it would add another row with the same amount of levels. And deleting it is just as easy. You just click on the 3 dots and you delete it. So that's pretty intuitive to add additional criteria. And on the next slide, you'll be able to see the criteria groups. So if you want to add a new group, it gives you a completely new row. You can see it's not connected to the top row. And then you could use the plus signs to add additional levels, or you could use the little trash can item to remove levels as required, so that you had a different number of levels on this criteria to the upper criteria. So really quite intuitive for adding additional criteria groups and removing levels or adding levels as required. On the next slide, you'll be able to take a look at some of the additional options that you can use. So remember I said that the status of the rubric, the published, the draft, and the archive is different to the rubric visibility. So the visibility pertains to whether or not it is actually visible to students. So this is where you set whether you would like to make the rubric visible to students, if you would like to hide it from students, and then potentially maybe include the rubric feedback to the students, or if you would like to have the rubric hidden from students until the feedback is published. So this is where you would set your visibility options. You would also set your score visibility, whether or not they could see the score or whether you'd like to hide the score from students. And there's an additional description area here. And just to note that this description is for your personal reference. It's not a description that is either shared or could be made visible to students. So if you wanted to keep some notes about this particular rubric, this is where you could actually add this in. And in anybody who had the role which could edit a rubric would be able to see this, but not students. So these are kind of personal notes that you could keep in this optional description area. And at the end there, on the next slide, you'll be able to see a sample rubric. So this is what a rubric could potentially look like. So you can see here in this one, we have criteria groups, because the first criteria only has 2 levels, but the second criteria actually has numerous levels, got about 5 levels there. You can see that in some of the cases, there are descriptions added in, but not all of the cases, because remember, descriptions are completely optional. You don't need to put them in, but here you can see that there's descriptions at the lowest one for 0 points and for the highest one at 5 points. And you can see that these 2 criteria, which the first one is worth 1 point and the second one is worth 5, adds up to 6 in the total area. And at the bottom of a rubric, you'll always have this overall score where you can decide to have different levels. So say, for example, somebody got 6 out of 6, you could say that they're in the top level and they're getting sort of level 3, or if they got 3 out of 6, you could put them in the middle level, level 2, and if they got 0, then you could put them in the lowest level. So depending on the score that they achieved, it would place them into the overall score category as well. Right, so that's just a very, very brief run through creating the new rubric. And now we're going to move on really fast to actually attaching a rubric. So let's imagine we've created our rubric and now we want to actually attach it to an item. How do we do that? So just for the purposes of this example, we're going to use an assignment. So remember, you can use assignments, you can use discussions, and you could use grade items as well. So this example is attaching a rubric to an assignment. And on the assignment page, when you're actually creating or setting up an assignment, on the right-hand panel, you will see a section called Evaluation and Feedback. So in this particular example, you can see there, it actually mentions no rubric added. So you know currently there's no rubric added to this particular assignment. So the way to actually add it would be to expand that section that says Evaluation and Feedback. So on the next slide, you can see that is now expanded. And as soon as you expand that evaluation and feedback area, you will see a button that says Add Rubric. So we are going to pretend that we've just created our rubric. So under Add Rubric, you have the option to create a new one from scratch at this point, or choose an existing one. Because we've just created one, we're going to choose the option to add an existing rubric. And when you choose that option, you'll see a little pop-up window that says Add Existing Rubric. And you can either search for it if you have lots of rubrics there, or you can just select it from the list by putting a check mark in the rubric that you would like to attach to this particular activity, and then choose Add Selected. And that would actually attach the rubric to your assignment. And on the next slide, you'll be able to see that it would confirm for you that you now have a rubric attached to this assignment. The name of the rubric is represented there. And you will notice that below that, there's actually a button that says Add Rubric. And yes, you can actually add multiple rubrics to a single assignment. I don't know what the use case for that might be. There might be one, you never know. But just to be to note that if you add multiple rubrics to an assignment, only the marks from the first rubric will actually be fed through to the gradebook. So in this instance, you can see that this particular assignment, we've asked for the marks to be pushed through to the gradebook. Only the marks that are from the first rubric represented would be fed through to the gradebook, not all of the rubrics that you attached here. So attaching a rubric to an item is quite easy, and that is how you would attach it to an assignment. Now, how would you use a rubric to actually go ahead and mark something? Let's take a look at that. So we're going to see how to use the rubric to mark. So again, I'm going to use the example of an assignment. So here we are on the page where one would normally give feedback and see the submission of an assignment. And once a rubric has been attached, you will see that it'll be represented again in the right-hand panel as being an evaluation option to use the attached rubric. And there are two ways to actually use this. So you'll see there in the green outline, there's a little icon, which is the pop-out icon, and the blue arrow pointing to the right is the expand option. So these are two different ways that you can actually get to view the rubric and use it for marking purposes. So the first one we're going to have a look at on the next slide, you'll see, is the expand option. So you can see, because you're working within the narrow confines of this panel, expand expands it downward vertically and does give you quite a narrow kind of restricted view of the rubric. But as you can see, it's fairly easy to use for grading purposes. You would expand it, and then you would just select the options by clicking on the horizontal bars to give the appropriate marks. So if you are very familiar with your rubric and you just need to click the appropriate mark, this might be an option for you to use, the expanded view. But the pop-out view on the next slide, you'll see, actually gives you a much better view of the rubric. It pops it out into a new window. You can see the full complete rubric with the descriptions, and you would mark it in a similar way just by clicking on the relevant section in the rubric. And you can see there, depending on which section you are clicking on, it automatically changes the points for you in the score column, and then adds those up for you in the total column. And then depending how you would set up your overall score, your levels to be represented for your overall score, those would change depending on which levels you were actually selecting. So this is the pop-out view of the rubric, a more comprehensive, broader view. Right, so that is how you would use a rubric to mark. And I'm just going to pause quickly before we go on to the next section of grades. Are there any questions here? Okay, Elaine is asking about negative points for penalties. Are you talking about negative points on the rubric?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. As far as I know, with the rubric, you can't give negative points. That's as far as I know, but I do know that you can also give part points. So you can give like 0.5, 0.3, but not using a comma. You can use a point, a decimal point, but not a comma.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That helps.
Thanks, Elaine. And Lunel was asking, Lunel, were you asking, can a student create a rubric? Is that what you were asking?
Sorry. Yes, I was editing after I sent.
Okay, all right, no worries. No, students don't have the right to create rubrics. Only those people who have the rights to actually create and edit content within the Brightspace environment. So that would be instructors and support staff. But
sorry. Yeah,
go for it.
Cath, so remember yesterday with the discussion, there's a thumbs up and a thumbs down.
Yes.
So as in when you as an instructor post a message, so the students are able to respond either to your message, including other messages, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
there's, yeah. So I was just, so if they don't have rights, is there another way they can respond or not? It's just for you to use as an instructor. That's what I'm clarifying.
Correct. Yes. So the vote up, vote down that you are referring to from yesterday's webinar, that's a way for students to interact on discussions specifically. And rubrics are essentially an evaluation scheme to actually, for you as an instructor or support staff, to actually evaluate submissions that have come in through assignments, or through, you can use a rubric if you wanted to grade a discussion, but it's just for those people who have edit rights to use the rubric. Students can't create their own rubrics or grade other students using a rubric. Right, we're going to move on fairly quickly to the grades. So remember, grades are equivalent to the grade book within Vula. So this is where you would keep track of all the things that you had evaluated and be using this to provide an overview essentially of all the assessment within a course. It does have a setup wizard, so that's really nice, which can help you define the basic settings, and it's a 7-step process, and we're going to have a look at that really quickly. And you can create categories for different types of graded assessments if you want to. Categories are not mandatory. It's just another way of keeping your gradebook nicely organized if you wanted to. And there are some various different functions within the gradebook, and one of the nice ones is the bulk edit function that allows you to edit multiple different elements within the gradebook all at one time. So we're going to dive into this quickly now and take a look at some of the elements here. So as with the other tools, how would you find this? Because grades is related to the activity and the submissions that are happening within a particular course, you do need to actually enter into your course to be able to find the grades. So from the UCT homepage, you would click on the look card and you would jump right into your course. So once you are in your course, you will find that at the top on the nav bar is an item called grades, and that is the quickest and easiest way to get to it if you are on your course homepage. And as with the other elements as well, you can always go via manage course and go to course admin. And on the course admin page, as you might expect, you will find this option to get to grades under the assessment category. So remember, we're looking at the course admin tools here. These are all the tools assigned to your course, and we're looking at them in the category view. So you'll see at the top there, category is highlighted. There is another view. You can sort them according to name, which just lists all of the tools in alphabetical order. So category is usually the more useful way of looking at it because it does break it up into these intuitive categories for you. So you can click on grades and that will take you straight through to the landing page of the grades tool. Now, as I mentioned, there is a setup wizard. And this is something that I would suggest that you take a look at initially, because being new to grades, this will help to guide you through doing the initial setup. So don't worry if you do a setup and then afterwards you decide you want to change your mind about something. You can go back and actually edit those settings, but the setup wizard just gives you a nice quick start, like a jump start to actually setting up grades from the beginning. So when you land on your homepage for your grades tool, this is what you'll see. You'll see a lot of buttons, a lot of links and things, but you'll see it's pretty blank because nothing has been set up yet. So you'll see there that it says there are currently no users to grade, and this is what a blank brand new grade page would look like. So at the top there, you can see there's various tabs. You can see there it says enter grades, manage grades, schemes, and setup wizard. And then below that, there's a row of buttons. So the buttons say import, export, switch, standard view, and more actions. So what I'm going to do is start slightly backwards and jump onto the setup wizard first of all, because as I said, this will give you a jump start to actually getting the basics in place so that you can actually fine tune your grades or your grade book later on. So we're going to start by jumping into the setup wizard. So as soon as you go into the setup wizard, as I mentioned, there's going to be 7 steps that they actually take you through and present various different options to you. So I'm going to go through this quite quickly because I am aware that time is always against us. So first of all, for step 1, you're going to be selecting or choosing a grading system. So this is very similar to Vula. If you've worked with Vula Gradebook before and you're familiar with the options there, a lot of this will look very familiar to you. So the first thing is the grading system. You can decide to have a weighted grading system. You can have a straight points system, or you can customize your particular formula for how you would like to set up your grading system. So if you're not quite sure right off the bat, one of the safest ones would be to go with points, because remember, you can always come back and customize and tweak and edit this later on. So points is probably the most simple and straightforward option to go with. So once you'd made your selection, you would click on the continue button at the bottom of the screen. And we would jump right into step 2. So step 2 is, how would you like your final grade released? So here you can see the various options. So you've got a calculated final grade, and you've got an adjusted one. So that would be if you would like to modify or adjust the user's grades before releasing them to them. Or you can select to have automatically release the final grade. So you decide how you would like the final grade released to the students. And once you'd selected an option, you would click continue. And then jumping straight on into step 3, this is how the grades are going to be calculated. So grade calculations. So would you like to drop ungraded items from the calculation? Would you like to treat ungraded items as 0? And auto update is to automatically keep the final grade updated. So in other words, make it visible, but as you change things, it's going to automatically change for the students to see. So once you decided on your options there, you would click on continue. And in step 4, you will find this is where you're going to choose the default grade scheme. So the grade scheme is quite nice in that you can either choose the one which is there, or you can actually create your own. All right, so a grade scheme is you would set something up as to how you would like to represent your grades. And the really nice thing about this is that you can also tie it to various different colors as well. So you can have different ranges, and we're going to look at this a little bit more in detail. So don't worry too much if it's not very clear at this stage, but you can elect to actually create your own, or you can just subscribe to the default one, which is percentages. So once you decided which one you would like to use, there is a little preview button. You can see where if you click on it, it'll pop it up and it'll give you an example of what that particular scheme would look like, or how those marks would be represented to the student. So that will help you decide which one would be best. And then you would just click on continue to jump straight into step 5. So step 5 takes you through managing the view display options. So would you like to have decimals in your scores? And if so, how many decimal places would you like to display? So you can choose that and then jump on to step 6 by clicking on continue. And in step 6, this is where you are going to define the student view display option. So what is it that the student can actually see? So here you can decide if they are going to be seeing points, if they're going to be seeing grade scheme symbols, if you would like to display decimals to them, how many characters you would like to display to them in the text items, and also if you would like to display final grade calculations to users as well. So once you'd made your selection there, you would click on continue, and you will see we're almost at the end now, because step 7 of 7, the last step, it'll basically give you a summary of all the items that you've already selected. So you can also click go back if you want to go back and change something. Otherwise, if you're happy with this initial setup, you can just click finish. So remember, you can always come back and change any of these at any stage. So we're going to jump into grade schemes. Kirsten, I can see that you said that your sandbox seems only to have the default grade scheme. All right, so I'm going to show you now how to actually create a grade scheme. So once we've gone through this, then maybe you'll be able to see if you have the option within your sandbox to actually create a new grade scheme. If not, then you can always drop an email to help@Vuller. Right, so we're going to jump in and have a quick look at how to create a grade scheme. So at the top here, you should see an item there that says schemes, and that is where you would actually create your particular grade scheme. So once you click on scheme and you jump into that area, on the next slide, you'll be able to see that it's going to ask you to either choose something that you already have or create a new one. Now we want to know how to create one which is right for us. So we are going to create a new scheme. So you click on the blue button that says new scheme. And on the next slide, you'd be able to see how you would set this up. So from the top there, you can see the name field is mandatory, as is with most of the elements within Brightspace. So you have to give this new scheme a name. You can optionally give it a short name as well. So I've called this one the 3-letter grade. So I just called the short name 3LG. It's just a short description. So this is where you define your ranges. So I've just used A, B, C here, and it gives you 3 ranges, but you can always remove them using the little bin icon at the end of each row, or you can add more ranges using the add ranges button below. So depending how you would like to split up your range, you can add or delete different ranges. So I've got ABC, and I've just said, you can see there's start percentage and a color. So I've just said from 0 to 39, I'm going to make that red. So if the student's mark is falling between 0 and 39, and then I put for 40 to 69, I put an orange color, and then I've created a third range where I just said 70 up to 100, I'm going to select a green. So basically it creates these ranges for you. You define the ranges and you define the colors, and it's just a nice way to actually represent the color scheme to students. So remember, in our wizard, when we were going through the wizard, there was a question around color schemes, whether you would like to use a scheme, and if you would like to make this visible to the students, this is what they would actually see, their feedback as a percentage with the associated color. So once you had created this, you would just click on save and close, and that would be your new scheme created. And you would see it listed there on the list of schemes, the list of available schemes. And if you would like to set this one as default, you would just click on the check mark in the right-hand column that says set as default, and it would set that one as default. So you can also see here under the more actions that you can copy and delete as well. So if you wanted to copy a particular scheme and maybe tweak it slightly and make a slight variation, or if you just want to scrap one altogether by deleting, this is where you'd find those options to copy or delete grade schemes. Right, on the next slide, we're going to have a look at how to manage grades, sorry. So I see we are quite pressed for time, so I'm going to go through this part really fast, but I'm sure you're all quite familiar with grades in Vuller, so a lot of this will look very familiar to you. So for manage grades, just to let you know that this is where the nice feature is for bulk edit. So bulk edit is one of the multi-action functions that they have, and you'll find this often throughout many of the Brightspace tools, where you can actually apply an action to multiple items that you select. So if you wanted to select absolutely everything, you would click the top checkbox. It would select everything. If you wanted to select individual items, you would select the checkbox alongside the required item and then use the bulk edit option. So on the next slide, you'll be able to see some other actions that you can also apply at this level on the Manage Grades tab. So this is where you could also create new items or categories within your gradebook. So sometimes you might want to add a manual item to the gradebook. This is where you would do it by clicking on New an Item, and you can see more actions that you can also apply here. You can reorder, you can view event logs, and this is where you can also manage the visibility or hide elements from users, and you can also delete at this level under Manage Grades. So new item would add a new item into your gradebook. So on the next slide, you'll be able to see if you added a new item, it would guide you through a couple of steps to create a new item in your gradebook. First of all, you decide what kind of item you'd like to add. Is it a numeric item? Is it going to be a pass-fail? Is it going to be a formula? So in most instances, it's probably going to be a numeric item where you're going to be adding a mark or a number item into the gradebook. So you would select that initially. And then on the next slide, you'll be able to see there's various properties that you can assign to this as well. So I'm not going to go through all of these because they're quite intuitive, but some of the important ones to note under the properties tab here is you can decide to align it to a category. Remember, categories are completely optional. They're not mandatory, but it is a way to organize and keep your gradebook kind of neatly partitioned or apportioned into little categories. So if you'd like to use categories, this is where you could apply it. You can also see here that a new item could potentially also have a rubric attached to it. So if you would like this item to have a rubric attached, this is where you would indicate this. And as with the other example we used previously with assignments, you can either add an existing one or you can create a brand new one right here at this point. And then there's various other display options, which you can also have there. There's, if you would like to display class averages, display grades, override them. This is where you'd apply all of those options. And I'm going to skip over this slightly quickly, just in the interest of time. But you can see there's quite a few options there. So under the new item, some of the restrictions that you could put in place is, again, you can see this is another place to hide this from users or make it visible. You can also set availability, so start or end dates. Once you had selected start or end dates, that is when the display in calendar option would become available. You can see at the moment it's grayed out because the start and end dates have not yet been selected. And you can also use release conditions. So we're not going to go into detail about release conditions, but essentially you could either attach an existing release condition, or you could select one from the drop-down list, which basically means that once that particular release condition had been fulfilled, they would gain access to this particular item. So this is where you would attach release conditions under the restrictions tab. So those are the options that are available for creating a new item. And as I mentioned, you can also create categories. So categories in this example that you're looking at right now, you can see there's week 1 and there's one item there. Then there's week 2 and there's 2 items there. So the week 1, week 2, those are categories. So if you wanted to create a new category, you would just click on the new button and select category. So this is how you'd create a new category. You can see it's pretty easy to do. You would just give it a name. And as with everything within Brightspace, your name is always mandatory. You could optionally give it a short name as well. And you could put a description there, and you could decide whether or not you would like your users, which are your students, or sometimes referred to as learners, if you'd like to allow them to view this description as well. So it's pretty easy to do. Just give it a name and a description. And then under the restrictions tab for a new particular category, you'll see that these are very, very similar to when creating the new item. You have the date availability, hiding or showing, or attaching release conditions to actually access this particular category. So once you'd made your selection, you'd just click Save and Close, and your new category would have been created. So just referring back to some of the other additional options that are available here under the More actions, just taking a look at reorder. So if you would like to reorder the items as they were displaying on the list here, you would select reorder. And it would give you all of the items, and you can see the numbers in the sort order column on the right-hand side. You would just change those numbers to represent the new order that you would actually like. And just to note that you are viewing this currently in expanded mode, so you can see the categories and you can see the items contained within each category, but there's also a collapse. You can see at the top there, it says collapse all. And if you collapsed all, you wouldn't see the items, you would just see the categories. So if you were more interested in just reordering the categories and not the items themselves, the collapsed view might work better for you because you would just see the categories. So once you had reordered your items accordingly using the numbers on the right in the sort order column, you would just click Save. One useful item here under the More actions is the event log. So once you click on event log, it will take you to a page where you can view this, which is the event log. And just to note that this particular event log is not to be confused with the other event log, which shows student activity. This particular event log is actually showing your activity. So all the events or the steps that you've taken in the grade tool, if you've created items or if you've created categories, this would all be listed here. So this is actually your event log, not a student event log at this stage. Some of the other options that are available under the More Actions dropdown is Make Visible and Hide. So as you can see, this is another place where you can apply the visibility. And this is actually a multi-select option. So in order to apply the visibility, to make it visible or to hide it, you do need to add the check boxes first in front of the items you would like to apply the visibility to. So you need to check the items first and then select either Make Visible or Hide, as the case may be. Right, so entering your grades. This is, we're almost at the end now, so I'm just checking if there's any other questions. Not seeing any questions in the chat at the moment, but last little bit, just how to get your grades into the grade book. So in most instances, when you're actually creating an item like a quiz or an assignment, you might be sending your marks straight through, but there are other ways to get your marks into the grades tool or into the grade book. So under the Enter Grades tab, the first option there you have is Import. So if you click on Import, it pops up the little window and it does give you a sample file that you can download. You can see there it says Grade Sample Import File. So that will give you the required format that you would need to follow to actually upload like a bulk upload of files. So you can use the import, and using the supplied CSV template, you can import a bulk lot of marks into gradebook, into grades. And then the next option is you can also export. Okay, so once you have clicked the export option, it would pop up this window and you'll be able to set the relevant options that you would like to include in your export. And as you can see, you can export this to CSV or you can export it directly to Excel. So it's going to be an XLSX file and you can export it here with your particular options that you had applied. And on the next slide, this one is, you are currently viewing this in spreadsheet view. So here you can see you would have your table with your users listed. And this is what we call the spreadsheet view. And then the button there that is highlighted is switch to standard view. So that toggles between standard view and spreadsheet view. But spreadsheet view, as you can see the points on the right-hand column there, this is where you could actually override existing points and actually add or enter points in manually in the spreadsheet view. So on the next slide, if you have a look at the standard view, you can see this is where the grade scheme with the coloring comes into effect. So if you'd elected to have a grade scheme and you'd elected to show it to students, this is where it would show up in the standard view. So to get back to spreadsheet view again, you would just click on that toggle button at the top to revert back to the spreadsheet view. And on the next slide, you'll be able to see under more actions, you have a couple of options there. One of the most useful ones is the hide show columns. So if you had a lot of items in your grade book, but you didn't want to be seeing all of them all of the time, this is where you could elect to show or hide particular columns in your grade book. So this is your particular view. As an instructor or a lecturer, this doesn't affect the view that is for the students. So it just refines your view to be able to focus on particular items where you might want to enter marks quickly into the grade book. And you can see next to the username, there's two little icons there. So the first one is a little flag. If you wanted to use that as a flag, it's only for you to see. The students won't see that their name is flagged. So if you were, for example, say entering marks into your grade book and you hadn't finished and you were partway down the student list, you might want to use the flag to indicate where you were in entering the numbers. And the other icon next to that that looks like a little graph, that is an option to actually get a snapshot of that particular user's progress to date. So that will pop up a little option and actually show you all of their marks and things to date, their progress report. So this has been a very, very fast whirlwind tour through those three tools, Rubrics, Quick Eval, and Grades. And I do realize we've gone really, really fast. Thank you everyone for being here. And I want to say thank you especially to Cheng-Wen as well for driving the slides and your contribution today as well. And also Max for being here in the room and organizing the event. So thank you everybody and have a good day.